Okay guys, today I want to talk to you about the molecule adenosine triphosphate. It's better known as ATP. And this is the molecule that your cells use for energy. You've learned before that when we eat food we take in carbohydrates and we use those carbohydrates as a source of energy, primarily the sugar glucose. That glucose gets taken in by your cells and it's actually used to create this molecule adenosine triphosphate. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happens in this video. We'll go into more detail in the cellular respiration video about how ATP is actually made from the energy from glucose. But really, this molecule here is what your cells use for energy. Glucose has too much energy in it, and if the cells were to use the energy directly from that, I always equate it to trying to make your car move by throwing a match in the gas tank. So you don't want to do that because you'll ignite all that gas at once and use all of that energy up at once, and the car will move, but probably not in the way that you want it to go. ATP, on the other hand, is like taking a little bit of that gas and actually moving the car with that. So this is what your cells use. It's like getting a big paycheck, cashing that paycheck, and just taking a little bit of the money so that you can use that when you need it. So ATP then is sometimes called the energy currency of the cell, just kind of like money is the currency that we use to go buy things. And let me talk to you a little bit about how that is done today. So this molecule, adenosine triphosphate, is really just a nucleotide. It's got this ribose sugar right here with an adenosine nitrogen base attached to the top of it. And when you learned about nucleotides, you learned that nucleotides have a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. Well, the difference between adenosine triphosphate and another nucleotide is it actually has two extra phosphates attached right here for a total of 3, and that's where the name triphosphate comes from. If you look, these red lines right here show that there are some very high energy bonds that are holding these extra 2 phosphates on there. And those bonds are where the energy that the cells are going to use is going to come from. So let me show you a quick diagram of this. Here, the molecule's flipped around. We have our nitrogen base here, the adenosine, and our sugar, and the 3 phosphate groups here. Now, when the cell uses ATP for energy, a phosphate group gets released. So the bond between the second and third phosphate group is broken. When we break bonds, when bonds get broken, energy is released. And that energy is what the cell uses to move proteins, to help with active transport, and anything else that the cell needs energy for. So ATP loses its third phosphate, that bond gets broken, the energy is released, and the cell uses that. Once that happens, we have phosphates floating around, extra phosphates, and we have another molecule called ADP. Because it's lost its phosphate, it's now referred to as adenosine diphosphate. That prefix di means 2. So in this case, there's only 2 phosphates attached to this. Once the cell brings in more glucose and uses that glucose to produce this ATP molecule, what happens in cellular respiration, we'll go into that in more detail in another video, but the energy that the cell takes in from glucose is used to add this third phosphate group back onto the ADP molecule and produce more ATP. So it's a cycle. The cell uses the ATP, breaks the third phosphate off, gets the energy from breaking that bond. We have phosphate groups and ADP left over. The cell uses the energy that it gets from breaking down sugar to add that phosphate back on to create the ATP molecule, and the whole cycle starts back over. So in short, that's how your cells use ATP for energy. That's kind of how that ATP and ADP go back and forth. I hope this explains that, makes it a little bit easier for you. And we'll go into this in more detail when we talk about cellular respiration.